All right, good morning, friends. Would you believe it's already time? It's already time. Yep. It's 9 o'clock somewhere. It's 9 o'clock here, my friend. And it's 9 o'clock from... I don't have a very good grasp of time zones. Where does the central time zone stop? Rocky Mountains, I guess, and Mississippi River. Yeah, there's mountain time, right? So, El Paso's. Oh my goodness, Texas, guys. Let me just tell you about Texas real quick. It's big. Yeah. If you've never been, you should go. It's wonderful. All right. So we are studying the book of Daniel. We are already on chapter 4, which I know. I know, you blink and you miss it. That's how it goes in Pastor Mike's Bible studies. But here's the thing. I think I know where we left off, but I actually didn't mark it. So you'll have to help me out, make sure I don't start in the wrong spot. Someone who's got real good notes or a real good memory. Did we stop at verse 18-ish? Does that look right to you? You think I stopped at verse 4? No, I drew a picture of a tree and I diagrammed it and stuff. We're past that. Yeah. This is a test and you're all failing. Well, no. Yes?
I wrote down through verse 19.
Through verse 19. Okay. All right. Righteous. Yep, that seems right. You passed. Yeah. So let's just get the lay of the land as we always like to do when we do Bible study. The book of Daniel revolves around 4 guys and principally around one. Any guesses? Daniel, yeah, I would say so. Actually, in a weird way, though, this first portion of the book really revolves more around Nebuchadnezzar than any of them. Really, if you think about it. So in the beginning, we are in a time in the history of the people of God where the whole nation of Israel, that's Israel and Judah combined at this point, have been subjugated, taken into captivity. And Nebuchadnezzar, who is the Babylonian king, sort of the leader of the world superpower of the day, has taken from among the people he conquered guys with high potential, people he thinks would make for good leadership, advisors and so forth. And amongst them are Daniel. Who are the other 3? Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Very good. You get a passing grade. Everybody else, you got to work for it. Yeah, that's right. Of course, many of us know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But those are their Babylonian names. Those aren't their actual Hebrew names. We talked a little bit about the names last week, I think.
They changed the names so the song will rhyme.
Is that what they did? Possibly. I think also they changed their name for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's about assimilation. Trying to make them sound. Actually, this is an Ellis Island thing that happened quite a bit with American immigrants, right? People would come from these other countries, and their names would be hard to pronounce or hard to spell, and they would just kind of say, well, now you're Smith, or whatever, right? Or they'd change the spelling of the name. This also happens still today with, especially with immigrants from, my experience has been immigrants from China often do this. Well, they'll have a Chinese name, and they'll have a completely unrelated American name that they just go by. Which, and I get it, if you've got a name that's difficult for other people to say, it might get frustrating to have people saying it wrong all the time. I don't understand fully what's behind the curtain on why that custom is what it is. But in the case of Nebuchadnezzar, we actually get a little bit of a hint to it. So all of those Hebrew names are witnesses. They're testimonials, right? Because they make statements about El, God, or Yah, Yahweh, the personal name of our God, right? Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, Daniel. Those are all names that are statements about God, right? And so by giving them Babylonian names, he's actually putting on them sort of idolatrous names, right? So he calls Daniel Belteshazzar, Bel being the name of his God, right? Or one of the gods that they worship. Anyways, so our story is going to follow those four individuals, mostly Daniel, but even more so, mostly Nebuchadnezzar. At the beginning, they're recruited into this program. They refused, and this is an ongoing theme throughout the book. They're offered rich foods from the king's table, but they refuse them. Why? Probably because they would have been sacrificed to idols. And so from their perspective, both the eating of it and the witness of eating of it would be an act of idolatry. So what do? They simply refuse. They just say, no, thank you. We'll have simple foods. They don't make a big protest. They don't have a letter writing campaign. They don't do any of that stuff. They just say, that's, what y'all do is y'all, but for me, no, thank you. In the next chapter, we get the king has a dream, and being probably somewhat paranoid, but definitely being suspicious of his soothsayers and enchanters and Chaldeans and all those guys, being suspicious that they're frauds. He demands that before they can interpret his dream, they have to tell him what he dreamed. They have to peer into his mind and tell him what he dreamed. And when none of them can do that, he's like, well, these guys are worthless, so let's just kill them all. And as the guard's coming into Daniel's room, hello, I'm here to murder you. Daniel's like, yeah, but could you not for a minute? I'll do the thing that the king asked. I'll interpret his dream. And just tell the king, summon me whenever he wants, and I'll do it. And the guard goes away, and Daniel goes, okay, guys, we need to pray really hard about this, right? Because God hadn't told him the interpretation. Daniel's just kind of stepping out in faith that God's going to protect them. So they do pray about it. The king calls him in, and the king says to him, okay, tell me what I dreamed. And Daniel says to him, well, nobody can do that. That's impossible. But my God can do that. And here's what he says. You dreamed thus. Talked about a statue made out of different materials, feet of clay mixed with iron. Giant boulder rolls down the mountain, smashes the feet of the statue. It falls. The rock stands forever and becomes its own monument. Not an idol. Nothing cleft by human hands. Something of God's own making, right? Into an eternal kingdom. Now again, and we've talked about this a few times, this is in fact a prophecy about Jesus and his coming kingdom, which means that Nebuchadnezzar received a messianic prophecy from the Lord, which is pretty wild. Of course, he didn't understand it. Daniel interprets it for him then and says, you're the golden head of the statue. After you is going to come a few other kingdoms. One will eventually become corrupt, and this boulder will come down and wipe it out, and that's the end of those kingdoms, and God's establishing a new kingdom that will last forever. He also tells him that you are the golden head. God put you there, right? Nebuchadnezzar's like, that's amazing. I can't believe you did this thing. So, yes, praise your God. Next chapter. Nebuchadnezzar has decided he will fix the clay feet problem of the statue. So he makes the actual statue from his dream, where he's got a golden head. But his solution is, let's just make the whole thing gold, and then we'll be fine. So he makes a big golden statue and invites all the VIPs from all over the kingdom to come to the ribbon cutting ceremony. He's got a band, and they're ready to roll. And when the VIPs get there, he says to them, okay, so here's the deal. Now that you're here, when the band rocks out, you will bow down to the statue. If you don't, we'll throw you in the fiery furnace. Feels like a bit of a bait and switch, you know? If you ever got lured into one of those like timeshare talks or whatever, you know, you got to sit there through a long presentation. This is way worse than that. So the music plays, people bow down, but the Chaldeans, who are jealous of these Israelite guys, they go to the king and say, you know, we noticed that when everybody was bowing down, these guys, these three guys, they didn't bow down. And you know, you got to rule. So maybe you want to do something about that. Well, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't want to do something about that, but he's also Nebuchadnezzar, and he said the thing, and he's got this massive ego. So he comes to them and says, guys, I need you to get on board here, okay? When they play, you're going to bow down, or I'm going to throw you in the fire. So he's giving them a second chance and trying to appeal to them in a reasonable way as the king of the great superpower of the world. But they respond, well, I don't think we're going to do that. Our God can rescue us from the fiery furnace. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to you. Well, the king gets mad. Stokes the fire, makes it 7 times hotter. They tie them up. Some guards escort them to the furnace. I don't know. As a child, I always picture that they're up high and they fall into the furnace. I don't know if that's for real. That's just the image I always had as a kid. So as the guards get close, they die just from exposure to the heat. The 3 Hebrews fall into the furnace, or they go into the furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar's, didn't we put 3 guys in there? Why are there 4 guys in there? And they're just walking around. Everybody's like, I don't know. Interestingly, it's a little bit ambiguous in the reading, but I noticed reading it this time that Nebuchadnezzar is the only one who is shown to see the 4th person in the fire. Right? Maybe other people saw it, don't know, but that's the only one that's stated. So he calls them out, they come out, they're fine. No smell of smoke on them. And Nebuchadnezzar has this awakening moment. He's like, wow, unbelievable. I can't believe that your God saved you from the fire, and you don't even smell like smoke. And there was an angel in there protecting you this whole time. So he decrees that nobody can badmouth their God. And he puts them into high positions. Chapter 4 starts with Nebuchadnezzar having another disturbing dream. And he does what he did last time. He calls in all the wise guys. Nope. He calls in all his advisors, his wise men, and this time they can't interpret it. And it's a little ambiguous to me whether or not they are attempting to and he rejects their interpretation, or if they're just hesitant to give him a false interpretation after what happened last time. I'm not sure which one it is, but in either case, they clearly show themselves to be useless. So, lo and behold, Daniel comes in, and Nebuchadnezzar relates his dream, and Daniel's about to interpret it. So, the dream he had, there's this giant tree, tall and broad, large enough that all of the animals of the world can find shelter under it. It's got beautiful leaves. It's got abundant fruit such that all of the beasts of the world can feed from it. And then a watcher, a holy one, says, cut it down. And they do cut it down. And they bind the stump in chains. And at the end of the prophecy, it stops being about a tree. Right? At the end of the vision, it stops being about a tree. I'm going to reread that little bit because you can see there's a turn here. And it's probably this, right? This is probably the thing that for Nebuchadnezzar moves it from being just a vivid dream into something that really grabs his attention. Because listen to what gets said here. Chop down the tree, lop off its branches, strip off its leaves, scatter its fruit, but leave the stump and bound with a band of iron and bronze. Well, not chains, a band of iron and bronze amid the tender grass of the field. Let him, well, maybe the tree's a him, be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Okay. Let his mind be changed from a man's. We're not talking about a tree anymore, are we? Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him. Let 7 periods of time pass over him. Let the sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets it over the lowliest of men. And sets over it the lowliest of men. All right, so he even gives the purpose, right? So he tells what the I want to say punishment, but let's just say he tells what the coming events will be, and then he gives the purpose. So this sentence is by the decree of the watchers, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. You'll remember in the vision of the statue, Daniel makes it clear, you are the golden head. God has put you in this place. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't seem to get that, which is the important bit. Again, in the vision of the tree, he says, there's this great tree, God's going to knock it down so that everyone may know that it is God who rules. And if you're in a high place, that's because God put you there. Right? It's right there in the dream. I didn't break down for you the metaphor of the tree. I'll do it real quick. The beautiful leaves probably represent something like the beauty and honor of the kingdom, right? The fruit is the wealth and abundance of the kingdom, such that it's able to provide for the whole world. The shade and the branches are a place of safety. It's a place of protection from the elements, a place of refuge. So the image here is that this tree is for the benefit of the world, right? The tree is not an end unto itself, and the tree is not about its own glory. The tree is about providence and protection for the whole world. The interpretation Daniel's giving here is that Nebuchadnezzar, heathen though he may be, pagan though he may be, is God's tool for prosperity and peace for all the nations of the world, even those who do not honor him. Because guess what? God loves everyone, even those who don't love him back. All good things come from God. So this is one of those examples where we can see that God's care is extended to even those who don't recognize him. And that God uses people who don't in turn honor him. And it's a pretty good deal for Nebuchadnezzar, really, right? All right. So Daniel, who's named Belteshazzar. Remember, this is Nebuchadnezzar speaking in the first person. So he's telling the story. Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, right? We gave him that name, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. The king answered and said, we're on verse 19, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. So, interestingly, Nebuchadnezzar is trying to comfort Daniel. He's trying to give him the room he needs to speak truth to him. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. But of course he knows it isn't. But he is saying this because he has some affection for Nebuchadnezzar. He doesn't want Nebuchadnezzar to be wiped away. I think last week I said that this is like the opposite of Jonah, where Jonah's like, God's merciful and I hate it. I wish he'd wipe him out. And Daniel's like, no. I wish you didn't have to suffer in this way. All right, so he's going to give the interpretation now. Verse 20, the tree you saw, which grew and became strong so that its top reached to the heaven, it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, in which was food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heaven lived. It's you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. But again, if you remember the picture I drew last week, or you can just picture it now, the tallest tree, even this, Yggdrasil-style world tree, right? The tallest tree, its top is only brushing the bottom of heaven. It is still below heaven, right? And this is significant because as high as he may be, there is still one higher. Let's keep going. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the field. Let 7 periods of time pass over him. I'm going to pause on that real quick. 7 periods of time. The language is kind of ambiguous. This word only comes up in Daniel, this periods of time thing. There's only 2 sort of, maybe 3 natural fitting periods of time to this. And we're not sure what the word's supposed to mean. That's why we have sort of this generic periods of time. It might mean months. That's probably the shortest it would mean, for reasons you'll see here in a little bit. It might mean seasons. But most likely, and what most interpreters think, and the way the word does come up in other places, seems to suggest it's probably years. I don't want to hang too much on it being years. There's some things I want to say about it if it is 7 years, but I don't know because it's ambiguous. So I'm not going to do that. But when you read this, you might be wondering to yourself, what is 7 period? Like 7 minutes? 7 moments? Like what is that? Most likely it's 7 years. Not sure. Okay. Just a little note for you. It's probably worthwhile to just picture it that way, though. Okay. This is the interpretation, O king, in verse 24. It is a decree of the Most High which has come upon my lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox. You shall be wet with the dew of heaven. 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will.
He's the original vegan.
Original vegan? a bit, yeah. Although we did see Daniel and friends do that in the first chapter, so maybe not original. I want to talk about the historical Nebuchadnezzar for a minute, and then we'll break into some of the interpretations here. This is Nebuchadnezzar II, and he's also called Nebuchadnezzar the Great. And one of the things that makes him historically notable, he rules for a long time. He rules for almost 40 years, I believe. But he's known as a builder. He builds great cities and great monuments and stuff, okay? Keep that in mind here when you think about the punishment he receives. So what Nebuchadnezzar is doing, when you build a city, what you're doing is you're taking a bit of wilderness, you're carving it out and making it civilization, right? You're replacing the wild with orderly. You've taken dominion over that space, right? You understand what I'm driving at here? So God's punishment to Nebuchadnezzar II, the great builder, is to drive him away from civilization, to drive him out of his great cities, to send him out into the wilderness. The very things that he's known for, thousands of years later, God just removes from him in an instant. Okay. I don't think at the time this was happening, maybe, but I don't know if at the time this was happening, it would be known to Daniel or Nebuchadnezzar that his great legacy would be as a great builder of civilization. But the God of all time who sees these things, he knows how to get through to people, right? He knows the heart of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so the very first chapter, the very first interaction between Daniel and his friends and Nebuchadnezzar is in not having the rich foods. And now his punishment is, you're not even going to eat people food. Like, you're not even eating proper vegetables. You're going to go graze. It says that he's going to be wet with the dew of the fields. So that means that he's going to be out sleeping rough, right? He won't be in a tent. It's not going to be luxurious. It's not even going to be in a sleeping bag, probably. It gets worse, though. Verse 26. And as it was commanded to leave the stump of the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. So they cut down the tree, they bind the stump, but they leave the stump. Because there's hope for it to grow again. Get it? This is important, and this is where Jonah gets it wrong and Daniel gets it right. Because God doesn't delight in the punishment. He delights in repentance. He wants Nebuchadnezzar to humble himself. Remember, I told you that this tree that was built, its purpose was for the world. Protection. And wealth even. Prosperity. For all people. That's the goal. That's what God's using him for. But he seems to get it inverted, where he thinks it's all about himself. This is what it says, right? Leave the stump of the roots of the tree. Your kingdom shall be confirmed for you, right? So you'll get your kingdom back. Your kingdom will be confirmed for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. And how is he going to demonstrate that heaven rules? Show mercy to the oppressed. Right? I mean, that's just another way of saying, use what you have to help those in need. Make yourself the servant. Well, I wonder how it's going to go. Verse 28. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, that isn't good. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king answered and said, Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty? Who is Nebuchadnezzar all about? It's all about himself. He looks out at his kingdom, and who's it for? This great city that he's built, who's that for? It's a royal residence for my glory. Well, buddy, now, it's been 12 months since that prophecy. I guess, you get comfortable, you forget things, right? You ever forget? Happened to me once. He sees Babylon as a government by the king, for the king, right? Whereas God intends him to be a blessing to the whole world. So, verse 31, while the words were still in the king's mouth, that's a vivid picture for you. While the words were still in his mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. Who's talking right now? God. God's talking to Nebuchadnezzar. I know I've mentioned this before, but gosh, I feel like this just bears highlighting because, sometimes I think as the people of God, we kind of think we get we get exclusive access to God, like God cares about us. But God's talking to Nebuchadnezzar directly. I mean, he's not even using a prophet, It's wild stuff. Let's just make this practical for a moment. If you're ever talking to somebody and they're not a believer yet, but they think they had an experience of God talking to them, listen carefully to what they say. You know who God is. If what they say sounds plausibly like it might have been something God would say to them, I would say, don't be too skeptical. But if they're sharing it with you, then maybe there's some follow-up that God's asking you to do, Maybe you're supposed to take them the next step. That's how it worked with Saul, remember? When Saul was going to Damascus and God appeared to Saul, spoke directly to him. But the next step was followed up with Ananias. And that's what led him into the faith. So, I had a friend once back when I was in Virginia who had spent some time in Morocco. And he and a group of people had been called by God to Morocco to do ministry. What ministry, you ask? Pray. They believed God put them there to pray. It's not very flashy. There's not a lot of action to it. But what he told me was that they just prayed and people came to the faith. And what happened on many occasions is a man who was not particularly seeking Jesus saw Jesus in a vision, and Jesus told them to go to this place where these people praying were. And that's how they were brought into the faith and taught about the Bible. Yeah. It's probably not out of the question that it might happen to somebody in your context, your neighborhood too. Maybe not that dramatically, maybe not exactly like that, but everything is tailored to the person. So it is with Nebuchadnezzar. So God himself speaks to Nebuchadnezzar. And while Nebuchadnezzar is speaking to himself, because that's how he rolls. Verse 33, immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. When I heard the story as a kid, I kind of pictured that he was like transforming into an animal, like werewolf style, like a were-eagle. You're rereading this as an adult, it doesn't say any of that. However, it did use the image of eagle's feathers. So I know that there are some translations of this that go with lion's mane for reasons, but those seem to be not very compelling cases. Eagle's feathers seems to be what it is. What I think might be happening here is, as it gets full of dirt and kinked up and stuff, it's getting clumpy. But the point is he's getting a very wild appearance. His nails are growing out like talons, which is interesting because he isn't behaving like a predator, right? Eagles have talons because they grab things and tear things. He's not that. He's out there munching grass, which is super humiliating. I mean, if you can picture for a moment that posture. He is, every time he eats, prostrated. He's prone. That's the same gesture, the same physicality that was demanded of people to worship the statue, to bow down. Well, now guess who's bowing down? It's humiliating. But he's also compelled. He can't help it. 7 periods of time pass by. Now, it's got to be more than 7 minutes, right? Unless he's got some real Rogaine action going on or something. It's got to take some time for that hair to grow out, for those nails to grow out, right? So is this months, maybe? Years? Yeah, maybe. And we'll talk about this when we get into chapter 5, which I don't think we're going to do today. But when you are the king of an empire, everybody wants to sit on that throne, And that's why kings have food tasters to make sure that they're not being poisoned. And they've got bodyguards and they've got all that kind of stuff because people are just ready to grab the throne, right? But this is wild to me. After he's absent for however long, God promises you get to come back to your throne. Really? I mean, somebody didn't kill their way to the top or God's preserving it for him. I mean, that's the only explanation. There's no other way that the king gets to leave his throne for 7 months, 7 years, and be able to just come back to it seamlessly. Not when you're if our president was out of commission for 7 months, do you think he just gets to waltz right back into the White House the day he's feeling better? I really doubt that. And that's a much more civilized situation than what we have here. You'll see that because the next several kings last at max 2 years before they reach an untimely end. But we'll get there. Okay. So he's out. He's munching on grass. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, he's telling the story about himself. Probably the most embarrassing period of his life. I can't imagine. This guy who, last chapter, is building golden statues to himself, of himself. Probably massive ego, right? He's been so humbled that he's putting down in first person a record of a season of madness and humiliation. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. again, as we'll see, that's not a claim that Nebuchadnezzar gets. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom. And still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are right, and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. What a fascinating story. What a powerful testimony. Now, I don't know how you feel about our government. It seems to me that there are some folks who could use a period of humiliation, and humbling. That's not for me to do, just as it wasn't for Daniel to do. We trust God and his wisdom to do this stuff. But it's remarkable to me that the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. And the Lord restores. And Nebuchadnezzar, the way I read this, and maybe I'm misreading it, so, y'all read it with me, check me, but the way it seems to me, he's out in the field, he is munching on some grass, he looks at the heaven, it's almost like the prodigal son sitting there eating the pods from the pigs, He's out there, he looks up to heaven, and clarity dawns on him. And his reason is restored to him. And in that moment, here come a bunch of advisors walking out of the field to check on him. And he addresses them like a man. And they pick him up and they take him back to the castle, back to the palace. I mean, it's virtually a fairy tale, right? Only this is a real guy. I mean, you can check him out. It's part of Babylonian history. The moment of repentance, he is restored, and even more glory is added. But he finally seems to get it. It's like, all this glory, all this honor, all this power, all this wealth, I get it. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to God on high. My reign should be in service to him. There's probably stewardship in this too, right? Because as long as Nebuchadnezzar is doing what he does for his own glory, he's going to make choices, right? Like building giant golden monuments to himself. But the call of God in his dream, as interpreted by Daniel, is, no. You need to take care of the oppressed. You need to humble yourself and start thinking about other people. That's why God put you in this position. And so it's the fear of the Lord and in honor of the Lord that he then becomes a servant of others. Right? And this is that very same idea that's communicated to us through Jesus, where he tells the story of the sheep and the goats, right? Where he's like, well, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was naked, you gave me clothes. You visited me when I was sick. And all the sheep are like, when do we ever do that? You weren't hungry or sick or naked or any of that stuff. And he says, well, whatever you did to the least of these, you did it to me, right? And I think this is interesting too. It's just a thing you should know about our God. Our God never asked us to make golden statues to him. He actually forbade that. But he did say, take care of the widows and the orphans. Be kind and protect the stranger in your land. Be generous. Be kind to your brother. That's what God wants. He doesn't want statues. He wants love. All right. Rather than start chapter 5, I think we're going to stop there. It's a little bit early, but that's okay. So we got church coming up in about 14 minutes. So stick around, refresh your coffee if you need to do that. And next week, we'll dive into chapter 5.